Hi there, welcome back to another episode of Good Grief Life After Loss. I'm your host, Skylar Jackenthal, and I'm super excited about today's episode where I talk about a situation I have encountered so many times, which is that super awkward, uncomfortable, and unfortunately inevitable moment when someone asks you about that dead person in your life. For me, it always comes with the question, so do you have any siblings? A very simple question that turns awkward real fast. So in this episode, you'll get to hear about some of my personal encounters, some advice from me, and hopefully if you don't find this helpful or relatable, you at least find it a little comforting and maybe get a good laugh out of it. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love if you could follow and subscribe to the podcast on whatever streaming platform you're listening on. Leave a review, that would be amazing. And then definitely find me on Instagram, goodgrief.pod is the Good Grief Instagram, and I would love for you to follow along and stay up to date with posts. That is it for now. I hope you loved today's episode, and let's get into it. All right, let's get into today's episode and talk about how to tell people about the grief and loss in your life. So for me, I grew up my entire life in Park City, Utah. I was born and raised there, and Park City is a very small town. It's a super close, tight-knit community where it really truly does feel like everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everything going on in the community, which at times is brutal, but also at times is great. And the community really has the ability to rally together, which they did for our family and for Sam. But because it was such a small community and Sam's death was so public, I truly never, ever had to tell anyone in Park City about Sam's death when I was growing up there. From the time he died when I was 14 to the time I left for college when I was 18, I don't remember ever having to have that conversation. I was certainly approached by a lot of random people in the grocery store or parking lot, wherever they saw me, because they recognized me and they knew that I was Sam's sister. I would be hugged by random people. People would come up to me crying and say they were so sorry for my loss and they felt so connected to Sam and our family. So I had the opposite problem of having to tell people, which was that everyone knew who Sam was, what had happened to him, and kind of as a result, they knew who I was and who my family was. All that to say, I really never had to tell anyone about my dead brother for a very long time. And I think for a while I resented the fact that everyone knew who Sam was, who I was, but I think it was also a blessing in disguise that I never had to have those tough conversations. The first time I can remember having to tell someone about my dead brother was when I started my freshman year at college. My new friends who I had met, who I kind of anticipated I was going to have to tell them about Sam. I didn't even have to tell them because they all had social media, and I'm pretty public about my loss and about Sam on social media. So they had all followed me on social media, and they just already knew about Sam, what had happened. I'm sure they did their research and did their digging, and it was never a question or a conversation. However, just a few weeks into my freshman year, sorority rushing took place, and that was a tough experience for sure. For those of you who haven't rushed, one of the first events, usually at least in my case, was, you'd all go in a big room with all the sisters and you'd kind of get assigned to a sister to talk for 5 minutes, and then the timer would go up or they'd casually switch you to a conversation with someone else. So by the end of the night, you've talked to like 5 to 8 different girls in this sorority, and they're all just asking kind of basic get to know you questions, which usually is not a problem at all, except for in my case, one of the average, most typical get to know you questions is, so do you have any siblings? And instead of breaking the ice, that just made it super uncomfortable. And no hate to them, because that is such an easy icebreaker question, easy way to get to know someone. In my case, it's just a tricky situation. So the first time someone asked me, do you have any siblings at Sorority Rush, I said, I don't. How about you? And quickly changed the subject. That worked. They started talking about themselves immediately, and we never revisited my answer about having no siblings. So I was feeling pretty good about that one. The second time, someone said, do you have any siblings? And I try to switch things up. I said, yes, I have an older brother. And before I could change the subject, they followed up so quickly with, oh, what does he do? Is he in school? Is he working? And I just so quickly came up with the lie that he was in school at the University of Utah. And that was that. We moved on, and I was feeling pretty proud of myself, feeling pretty confident. The third and final time at this sorority rush event that someone asked me if I have any siblings was a tough one. She said, do you have any siblings? And I decided to try a new answer. I told her, oh no, I'm an only child. And instead of just casually reacting to that, she erupted in joy and was like, oh my God, me too. Don't you just love being an only child? It's amazing. Only children get so much hate, but I just think it's the best thing ever. And so clearly that backfired on me, and I probably should have known in that moment that I was not meant for the sorority life. Over the years, I've learned to test out a variety of different responses to that question, and honestly, I have always found that the worst answer is saying I'm an only child. It just never works. Even if that person has only known me for like 5 minutes, somehow me saying, oh, I don't have any siblings, I'm an only child, always provokes the other person to say, but you don't seem like an only child. Like, they always use that phrase with me, which I appreciate because I don't want to seem like an only child. No hate to only children, but they have a rap. There's kind of a stereotype with only children. So when they say, oh, you don't seem like an only child, it leads me to want to prove them right. Like, no, I'm not an only child. I actually grew up fighting with my older brother, and I always got picked on, and we had to argue over who gets to pick the next show. And I know what it's like to share my toys and be bullied by a big brother. I feel defensive. Like, I want them to know I lived those experiences, because even if technically now I guess I am an only child, I certainly did not grow up that way. And during the most fundamental years of my life, I was not an only child. I was an annoying younger sister. It's funny now that I feel like I find myself so hyper aware of the questions I ask other people and the topics we discuss. Like, when I'm asked to come up with an icebreaker, for me, I'm like so considerate of what anyone else in the world could be going through and how a question can make them uncomfortable. Even at work the other day, we were talking about like how old our parents were and how old our parents were when they had us. And for me, it was totally normal conversation, but in my head, I was sitting there thinking like, oh my God, what if someone at this lunch table has a dead parent? Like, I feel so bad for them. And I just don't think other people think that way until you've experienced loss yourself. So unless I know you have two parents, I will never ask what your parents do for work. I'll never ask how many siblings you have, maybe more because I don't want you to ask me back, honestly. But I will just never make assumptions that, if I happen to be wrong on that assumption, would make you feel really uncomfortable and create an awkward situation. But obviously not everyone feels that way or even has that awareness, just because why should they? It shouldn't be on their radar if they haven't experienced loss. So for me, I thought the sorority recruitment process was my biggest test, but my truly biggest test actually came later in my junior year of college when I met my now boyfriend, Harrison. One of the very first times we hung out, he just super casually asked me like, hey, do you have any siblings? And without even thinking, just out of instinct, because I was like, I don't want to make him uncomfortable. I don't want to kill the vibe we're having. This is like our second date. Like, we don't know each other that well. I said, no, I don't have any siblings, and just immediately changed the subject and immediately regretted that I had done that. But we had just started talking. It was still in that cutesy, fun stage where everything is just sweet and happy and fun, and there's no room to ruin a good date with bad news like my dead brother, which, like I said, I instantly regretted that I made that call. And then a few weeks later, I actually ended up going home to Park City for our annual Live Like Sam fundraiser, where I was going home to be our guest speaker, to help raise money, to meet all of our supporters, things like that, and to literally go honor my dead brother. And instead of telling him that I was going home for my own foundation in honor of Sam, I just said I was going home for like a random charity event and left it at that. Which, again, why I did that, I don't know. I think you should never be afraid of getting deep in conversations with friends and in relationships. But at the time, I panicked, and it just is what happened. So I felt hopeful that he would just find a way to stalk my Instagram, and just like other people in my life, he would figure it out for himself. But of course, I managed to be dating one of the only college-age guys who didn't have social media. And we had met on Tinder, so all he knew was my first name. He didn't even know my last name, so whether he would have wanted to stalk me or not, he literally didn't even know how. So that never happened. He was never able to stalk my social media or even Google me and find all the news articles about my brother. Just didn't happen, unfortunately. So once things started to get more serious and I could tell he was not going away, this relationship was going to last, I realized that I needed to share this side of me with him and tell him my story. And I remember when it came time to finally telling this guy who was about to be my boyfriend about my dead brother, I had so much stress, so much anxiety just about how was I going to tell him? How was he going to react? And in my head, for some reason, I had built up this huge scene about how it was going to be so awkward and freak him out and how he was going to run and never look back. And I remember calling like my parents, my friends, I was so stressed and so nervous that I had to make this big deal out of it. And like, hey, I have to tell you something. It's kind of awkward. My brother's dead. Like, I don't know why I just made it this big thing. But instead of all the horrors I had imagined, it was the exact opposite. I randomly sprung it on him just as he was about to drop me back off at my dorm. I was just like, hey, I feel like I should tell you this real fast before you drop me off in 10 seconds. And we ended up taking about 10 more laps around campus while we talked, and he listened, and I explained my story to him. And when it was finally all said and done, honestly, I felt so relieved, but I also felt so stupid for not giving him the benefit of the doubt in the first place and just telling him the truth up front. I feel like I built this big, scary scenario in my head about how is he going to react when he finds out I lied and that I said I don't have any siblings and I actually have a dead brother. And I just, honestly, in the end, it was just like I was my own worst enemy when it came to that. And he ended up being so great and handled the situation like a champ. So, since then, I'd like to think I have gotten better at telling people my story, telling people Sam's story, but it honestly still makes me super uneasy because I know by telling them about my dead brother, I'm probably making them uncomfortable. Like, even if I'm not uncomfortable, I know they're uncomfortable learning that. But the reality is, I shouldn't be wasting all of my energy on making others feel comfortable and shielded. Like, that's so exhausting, that's so unnecessary, and honestly, I've never met a person who's given me a negative response when I choose to open up my heart and be honest and tell them about Sam, which I am so happy to say. But trust me, I am aware that it's much easier said than done. Even after almost 10 years without Sam, I still do find myself feeling flustered when asked about my family. It's just inevitable. Even very recently, I spent Thanksgiving at my boyfriend Harrison's house with his family, and his grandparents were there. And this was one of my first few times getting to really hang out with his grandparents and meet them. I don't get to see them very often, so I was really hoping to use this as a time to let them get to know me better over the holidays. And of course, at the end of the night, we were all sitting around in the living room watching a movie. There was a little background chatter, and his grandpa just like super casually kind of shouted across the room, "Hey, Skylar, do you have any siblings?" Like, just a super casual question that in literally any other situation would have been totally fine, totally casual, but it was so out of the blue that it just completely took me by surprise, and I was just like immediately panicked, and I feel like I had that like fight or flight moment, and I was like, oh, it's flight. Like, I can't have this conversation with like my boyfriend's whole family's here and we're kind of watching a movie and it's loud and no one's paying attention, but like people are kind of, I don't know. I was just like immediately in panic, and so I choked and I said, oh no, it's just me, no siblings, which was, I guess, my best attempt at not completely bringing down the energy of the room. And that was that. The conversation was over. I like snapped my head back to the TV and went on watching the movie. And again, I immediately regretted my answer because that was the perfect opportunity to let his family and his grandparents in and share with them this like little hidden special piece of me that's truly shaped so much of who I am, and just to let them get to know me better. But unfortunately, like the timing felt wrong. I didn't want to kill the mood. And so I said, no, I don't have any siblings. And I realize now that conversation topic may never come up again, because why would you ask someone twice if they have any siblings? So I am a little bummed that I feel like I lost that chance, but just goes to show that like even 10 years later, it's still difficult. I'm still not sure how to handle those situations. I don't even know how I would have handled that one differently, honestly. But I can tell you that it gets easier, but also it really doesn't. Even with time, it doesn't get easier, unfortunately. And that sucks because I really do wish that I knew another way to handle that conversation. And I will say, I have come to learn that honesty is usually the best answer. People are stronger than you think. They are kinder than you think. I rarely find myself disappointed with someone's response when I tell them about Sam. Obviously, it's a little awkward at first, but honestly, so what? I would rather a little discomfort at first than have to stress about my lie, so to say, later on. I think dishonesty in that situation, though it feels easier, just only creates more problems. And what's great about honesty is it is completely guilt-free. I don't have to feel bad about lying to someone or saying I'm an only child when I'm not, and feeling like Sam's looking down at me, mad at me, because I'm not an only child. That's the truth of it. I may not have a brother here physically now, but I did once. And that made me who I am. I will always be a little sister, and I will always have a big brother. That's that. So I think if you take anything from this, just know that you are not alone in having these really awkward conversations. There is no playbook. There is no perfect way to answer them. Hopefully this episode was a little bit relatable for some of you. I hope you enjoyed it. And just know that you are not alone, but also that people are kinder, they're stronger, they're better than I think we give them credit. So give the people in your life a chance and try honesty and try sharing your story with them, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please remember to leave a review if you can. Again, I'm your host, Skylar, and this is Good Grief. See you next time.